John pulled his baseball cap low, walking into his own store. Outside, the shiny glass windows reflected an ordinary customer, a stranger. No one recognized him as the CEO of Thompson Enterprises, neither the cashier, the security guard, nor the manager on duty today. He wasn't here for anything significant. He had come to find out what was going wrong, and the silence that filled the store was a sign of something deeply amiss. The sobbing sounds echoing from the staff restroom snapped him out of his thoughts. These weren't just the sounds of crying, they were filled with deep pain, as if the world was crashing down around the woman. A silver name badge reflected on the wet tiles. Elena Santos cleaning staff, dimly lit under the fluorescent light. A name he didn't recognize, but the sounds he heard made his blood run cold. 3 months ago, the company had received an optimistic report about this store. Employee satisfaction scores were perfect, no complaints. But the cries behind this door told a completely different story. Standing there, under the cold white light, John couldn't shake the haunting question of what he might have missed. If this was happening right under his nose, under his management, how many other things had he failed to notice? In that moment, John realized one thing clearly. The truth he was about to uncover would be worse than anything he could have imagined, and it would force him to question everything he knew about loyalty, leadership, and the true cost of turning a blind eye. It all started with a seemingly normal visit, but the next 48 hours would completely change the way he viewed leadership in his work. Stay tuned, because what happens next won't just change Elena's story, it will make you reconsider everything you know about true leadership. John stood in front of the staff restroom door, gently knocking. "Excuse me, are you okay?" The sobbing suddenly stopped, leaving only the sound of unsteady footsteps, followed by a familiar sound of someone trying to regain composure. "I'm fine, just need a moment," the woman's voice replied. Even though it was a short sentence, it couldn't hide the weakness, the exhaustion that showed in every word. It wasn't a response, it was a confession hidden deep inside. Less than a minute later, Elena Santos, a petite woman in her 40s, walked out of the restroom, her face flushed from crying. Her cleaning uniform was wrinkled, and her hands were rough, marked by cracks and stains from harsh cleaning chemicals. But what caught John's attention wasn't the signs of hard labor. What he saw was a woman trying to hide her despair under an awkward exterior. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have bothered you," Elena said, her voice weak, not daring to look John in the eye. She bent down to adjust her name badge, her hands trembling as if it was the most important thing in her life. John observed her slowly, realizing that Elena's hands were trembling more from anxiety than exhaustion. The signs of hardship were clearly etched on her. Dark circles under her eyes, deep cracks on her hands from daily exposure to chemicals. But it was the way she avoided his gaze, stepping back as he approached, that made John feel the suffocating tension, the fear weighing heavily on her. "You're not okay," John said, his voice gentle but firm. "My name is Mike. I'm new here." Elena looked up at him, her eyes suspicious, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. After a brief pause, she shrugged, her weary shoulders carrying all the stress she was holding in. "Everything's falling apart," Elena confessed in a whisper, as though only speaking to herself. Elena stopped, but the silence only made John more curious. She couldn't hide the dire circumstances she was in, but she also couldn't speak openly, as if the cost of the truth was too high. "My daughter, Sophia," Elena continued, "she needs heart surgery. Her condition is getting worse, and I don't have the money to—" She stopped, swallowing back tears, then turned away as if afraid too much of the truth would show. John couldn't help but feel the confusion, the painful look she was holding back in every word. "She's only 8, and I can't do anything to save her," Elena continued, her voice now choked with emotion. "I don't want to make you feel bad. I'm just talking about—" John fell silent for a moment, looking at her eyes fixed on the work schedule posted on the wall. That schedule wasn't just a collection of hours worked. It was a symbol of the chaos that came with the unstable work lives of employees who needed steady jobs. Elena pointed to the faded work schedule, where her name was written sporadically. Sometimes 20 hours a week, sometimes 35 hours, but then it drops to 15 hours. No stability, no way to plan my life. "It's just like that," she said, her voice desperate. "They keep cutting my hours. You see, Mr. Miller says it's company policy, but I don't understand. The store is always crowded, always short-staffed. John looked back, his heart boiling with anger, but he managed to keep calm. What he saw wasn't just a mother worrying for her child, but a woman being exploited, forced to work under unfair conditions without a voice. Just as Elena had said, this company policy wasn't anything he had approved. "That's not how our company policy works," John said carefully. Elena looked at him, saying nothing, just nodding slightly. She quietly clipped her name badge back onto her uniform, her hands still shaking. She knew, and John could feel, that it was the only thing she could hold on to. "But it's fine," Elena continued, her gaze drifting outside the door, where other employees were walking by. "I won't cause any trouble. I just need the job, and now I have to get back to work." With a gentle step, Elena turned and walked away, but in her eyes, John could still see the exhaustion of someone enduring too much. John stood alone, watching her figure disappear, his heart full of rage. He had seen too much to ignore it. This wasn't just about one employee, it was about all the people being exploited in this system. John sat back in the break room, quietly observing as Elena continued with her work. Every step she took was slow and weary, as if every reach of her hand or bend down was a major battle. He couldn't help but feel heartbroken. Everything in this store was running, not for the benefit of people like Elena, but for a system full of guilt and injustice. The next morning, he quietly observed from afar, in the guise of a new employee. The store was still bustling, but everything no longer felt like the gleaming front it once was. He saw Brad Miller, the district manager, step out of his office, his eyes cold and full of arrogance. He walked by as if everyone around him was a tool to serve him. Brad stopped at Elena's counter, his eyes scanning the room, then sneered. "Santos, is everything still going well? Or are you spending too much time on your personal issues?" His voice dripped with disdain, as if Elena didn't deserve to be treated fairly. Every word he spoke felt like a direct hit at the respect she had left. Elena remained silent, head down, her hands still busy with her work. But the tension in her body was undeniable. She had grown used to this rude attitude. For months, she had lived under the suppression and restraint, accepting every taunt, every grueling hour of work, without any protection. John stood there in the shadows of an observer, feeling as if he were watching a heartbreaking drama unfold. Every word Brad spoke, every glance he threw at Elena, made John feel like a wound piercing his heart. This was not the company he had built. This was a place filled with injustice, where the vulnerability of the workers was ruthlessly exploited. A little while later, John decided he couldn't just stand there any longer. He followed Brad as he walked toward his office. Fine, John thought. What needs to be done will be done. He couldn't just watch anymore. This system had to be dismantled, but he knew it couldn't happen with just a punch. He needed to understand more, to uncover the deep secrets within, and he knew this opportunity wouldn't last long. John walked toward a table near the counter where Tommy, the electronics employee Elena had mentioned, was sitting during his break. Tommy saw John, his eyes flashing with confusion and suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Tommy asked, his voice whispering as if afraid someone might overhear. John glanced around to ensure no one was paying attention. "I need to know everything about Brad," he said, his voice low. "Everything about him and this company." Tommy looked at John, his skepticism fading, replaced by empathy and a willingness to share. Tommy took a deep breath and looked down at his hands as if trying to figure out how to tell a difficult story. "Brad's got something weird going on. He's not just an ordinary manager. He's got ways that no one dares question, but there are other people who can't fight against his intimidation. He uses people like tools, cutting our hours, then forcing us to work more. Then he turns around and tells us we're not good enough." "But that's not all, is it?" John asked, feeling the anger rise within him. "What's he doing with those hours? Who's benefiting?" Tommy glanced towards Brad's office, then nodded slightly. "He cuts our hours, then transfers those hours into someone else's account. It's a fake account, but he uses the names of relatives or friends to cash in our paychecks." John felt as if he'd been punched in the chest. This wasn't just ordinary greed. This was a sophisticated fraud system, hidden behind fake company policies. "And what else?" John continued, his hands clenched. "What else is he hiding?" Tommy looked around once more, as if afraid of being overheard, then whispered, "He's been changing the numbers, adjusting our work hours, even tweaking reports to hide the deficiencies. And no one dares say anything. If we do, he just tells us we're not fit for the company. And then, he'll easily find someone else to replace us." John stood still, his eyes locked on Brad as he walked back into his office. The anger inside him was boiling, but there was also a quiet resolve that everything would change here. What had he done to people like Elena? To their lives? The answer was clearer than ever. John quietly left the break room, his heart full of determination. He had gathered enough information to act. But what mattered wasn't just taking down a manager. It was dismantling a system. This system had been around too long and had destroyed too many lives. But now John understood. It was time to take action. John stood outside Brad Miller's office, feeling an unusual tension in the air. He had gathered enough evidence, recorded calls, computer data, and altered payroll sheets. Each piece was enough to remove Brad from his position, and not only that, it could lead to serious legal consequences for him. But the most important thing right now wasn't taking down a corrupt manager. It was bringing change to people like Elena and all the employees who had suffered in silence. John knew that if he remained isolated at the top, without sharing his power with those around him, things would quickly return to the way they were. He needed to do something bigger, something stronger. He needed to change the system. When Brad stepped into his office with his usual arrogant stride, John remained sitting in the corner, pretending to be a newcomer. Everything was playing out just as planned, but the guilt still lingered in his heart. It was hard to look at the employees he had once seen as resources, only now realizing that they were victims of an oppressive system. Brad didn't even realize the big change that was happening right under his nose. He continued to walk around like a free man, barking orders at employees as if they existed only to serve him. John watched him once more, feeling like time had stopped. Every word Brad spoke, every move he made, was a ruthless reminder of the cruelty that existed here. But everything would change now, and John was the one who would make it happen. The final confrontation. When Brad went back to Elena's counter to give more orders, John decided it was time for him to see what was coming. He stood up, walked with confidence, but inside, there was a trace of anxiety. Would he truly understand what he was about to face? "Brad," John called out to him, his voice low but powerful. Brad turned around, and for a moment, confusion filled his face as he realized it wasn't just any new employee calling him, but the one person he could never have imagined. "Hello, Brad. I'm John Thompson, CEO of Thompson Enterprises. Today, I'm not Mike Henderson anymore." John's words hit Brad like a slap in the face, leaving him speechless for a moment. He stood there, staring into John's eyes with confusion, but there was also a bit of arrogance lingering. Brad didn't know what to do, but John didn't give him time to think. He pulled out his phone and started playing back the recorded conversation he had with his accomplices. Every word Brad said in that recording felt like a direct blow to his ruthless nature. "Yeah, I cut Sanus's hours. I transferred her hours to someone else. She's an easy target, a single mother who needs insurance and will do anything to keep a job." John heard Brad's heavy breathing in the recording, followed by whispers from other colleagues around. He looked at John's phone, his face turning pale, frozen. This can't... "Oh, it can, Brad," John said, his voice even more resolute than ever. "And not only that, I've got all the proof I need to take you out of this company and expose everything you've done." Brad began to protest, but all his excuses were meaningless in the face of the undeniable evidence John held. He tried to wave it off, but John didn't let him have the chance. "I'm taking you out of here, Brad. You'll face the consequences of your actions. And not just you, but this entire system will have to change." The change begins. After Brad was escorted out of the office, John turned back to the employees who had been watching. Elena, Tommy, and others looked at him with an astonished expression. They couldn't believe what had just happened, but they couldn't deny the truth that something big had just occurred. John stood in the middle, looking into each face, then said, "Today, I didn't do this just for Elena. I did it for all of you. I didn't see what was happening here before, but I see it now, and I will fix it." He walked toward Elena, extending his hand. Elena, I know your life has been tough, but today I want to give you an opportunity you deserve. I want you to be the store manager. Elena looked at him, her eyes welling with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had fought to keep this job, and now John was offering her an opportunity she never dreamed of. I don't know how to manage, Elena stammered, but John smiled, saying firmly, "You've managed your work very well. You know better than anyone the struggles everyone here faces. You deserve this opportunity. I'll help you." A new beginning. The store was no longer a place of injustice. From this day on, everything would change. Employees who had been crushed under Brad's cruelty would be taken care of. Elena, with John's support, would lead them toward a new future, a place where there was no discrimination, no mistreatment. And with these changes, John knew his company wouldn't just grow financially, but it would mature in terms of humanity. After the complete transformation in the store, John knew that his company had not only overcome a crisis, but had reached a turning point, one that was decisive, not just for Thompson Enterprises, but also for any businesses that wanted to work in a fair and just manner. The first impressions 3 weeks after Brad Miller's dismissal, John returned to the store, this time not as a CEO checking on things, but as a witness to the clear changes. The atmosphere was different from the first time he visited, when everything was just beginning. The staff worked with confidence and joy, no longer fearful or silent every time the boss walked by. As John walked into the break room, the first thing he noticed was the sound of laughter, not the forced laughter of employees fearing their boss, but genuine, comfortable laughter. In the corner, Tommy, now the assistant manager, was training a new employee on inventory systems with a sense of pride. On the wall behind him, there was a framed certificate that read, "Employee of the Month, voted by staff." This was clear evidence of the change that John had brought about. "Tommy, how's everything going?" John asked as he approached. Tommy turned around with a proud smile. "It's going great, boss. Everything's on track. We don't have to worry about the job anymore. Everyone feels safe now. They know what they're doing and can share ideas. Our new policy, there's nothing better." John smiled, realizing that Tommy, who had once been threatened and fearful, had now become a true leader. He understood that this change didn't just come from boardroom decisions, but from small daily steps taken by the employees when they were given the opportunity and autonomy. Employees bringing about change. As John walked through the customer area, he saw Laya Torres helping a customer process a return. Laya, despite being 8 months pregnant, exuded confidence and joy in her work. No longer did she worry about being fired for being pregnant or whether she would get full maternity leave. With the new policies that John had implemented, Laya could now work without worrying about job security or her future. "Good morning, Laya," John said, prompting her to look up and smile. "Good morning, boss," she replied, her smile radiating pride. "Everything is great. I feel much more at ease." Seeing the employees work with confidence, no longer living in fear, made John feel that every decision he had made was worthwhile. Acknowledging achievements and next steps. But what John was most proud of wasn't just the change in the employees, it was the change in himself. He realized that he hadn't just saved a store or a company, he had saved himself. In the past, he had been too focused on numbers and meetings, not realizing what really mattered. Those people behind the company, the ones working tirelessly every day, the ones who had helped make Thompson Enterprises the name it had become. However, his journey didn't end here. With what had been accomplished, John decided to continue expanding this change across the entire system of Thompson Enterprises. He knew that the changes in this store would not fully transform the company unless there was a long-term plan to reinforce and sustain these new values. Taking stronger steps to spread change, John began rolling out an employee council program across all Thompson Enterprises locations. Each store would elect an employee representative, someone who would serve as a direct link between the staff and management. These representatives would participate in meetings, providing feedback and solutions to help the company improve and develop sustainably. Additionally, John decided to implement a new reward system, not just based on business performance, but also on employee satisfaction and engagement. If we want employees to give their best, we have to ensure they feel respected and appreciated, John said to his management team. Ambitious plans ahead. By now, the changes in the store had spread widely, and John realized that he could do even more to transform the entire retail industry. We can be a role model for the entire industry, not just in performance, but in how we treat our employees, John shared with his team. John also began thinking about sharing Thomson Enterprises' model with other companies, creating a certification system for fair labor practices. Stores that could prove they treated their employees fairly and took good care of them would receive special certification from the company. The end and a new beginning. After returning from his business trip, John sat in his office, looking out the window where the sun was shining. He knew that a long road still lay ahead for both him and the company, but now he felt more confident than ever. What he had done had not only changed the lives of the employees, but had also created a new model that could potentially change the entire retail industry. He smiled, then looked back at the long-term plan he had prepared. We're on the right path, John thought, and this journey has just begun. The next day, John decided to return to the store to witness the visible changes he had started earlier. As he walked in, the atmosphere in the store was completely different. There were no more worried looks or fearful whispers when the boss walked by. Instead, there was comfort, confidence, and a friendly exchange of work among the employees. Everyone was smiling, communicating openly with each other. Discovering the big changes, John stood at the checkout area where Laia Torres was assisting a customer with a return. He paid attention to every little detail: how Laia handled the problem, how she communicated with the customer, the professionalism in every action. For her, there was no longer fear when dealing with a difficult customer. She knew she no longer had to worry about unfair demands from management. "Good morning, Laia," John spoke, causing her to look up and smile. "Good morning, boss," she replied, her smile radiating pride. "Everything's great. I feel much more at ease." John nodded, satisfied. The change wasn't just in the policies, but also in the attitude of the employees. They no longer felt like forgotten workers in an outdated system. Instead, they felt valued and respected. The woman who became a leader. What made John happiest was the change in Elena. She had overcome her initial fear, transforming from a cleaning staff member into a true store manager. When she entered her office, Elena was still wearing her simple work uniform, but now with a new confidence, her eyes filled with determination. John stood up from his chair and greeted her. "Elena, how does it feel to sit in this chair?" Elena smiled. "A little strange, but I'm ready. I feel like I'm in the right place." She looked at the screen of her computer, where the employee and customer satisfaction numbers were steadily increasing. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Introducing the new system to the entire company. John didn't stop at changing just his store. He wanted to expand this influence across the entire Thomson Enterprises system. With the changes already in place, he knew the company wouldn't fully succeed unless there was a long-term plan to reinforce and maintain these new values. He decided to implement an employee council program at all of Thomson Enterprises stores. "Elena," John said as they discussed the new plan, "the employee council will be rolled out starting today. Each store will elect an employee representative who will serve as a direct link between employees and management. These representatives will be involved in meetings and will help ensure that employee concerns are heard and addressed in a timely manner." Elena looked up at John, her eyes filled with hope. "So the employees will truly have a voice, right?" "Exactly," John replied. "And not only that, but they won't have to worry about retaliation or being ignored when they share their opinions. We'll protect their rights, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's essential for the long-term success of the company." Ambitious plans. By now, the changes in the store had spread, and John realized he could do even more to transform the entire retail industry. "We can be a model for the whole industry, not just in terms of performance, but in how we treat our employees," John shared with his team. John also began thinking about sharing Thomson Enterprises' model with other companies, creating a certification system for fair labor practices. Stores that could prove they treated their employees fairly and took good care of them would receive special certification from the company. The end and a new beginning. After returning from his business trip, John sat in his office, looking out the window where the sunlight was shining. He knew that a long journey still awaited him and the company, but now he felt more confident than ever. What he had done had not only changed the lives of the employees, but had also created a new model that could potentially change the entire retail industry. He smiled, then looked back at the long-term plan he had prepared. We're on the right path, John thought, and this journey has just begun. In 3 weeks later, John returned to the store, not as the boss, but as an observer, a witness to the changes he had started. The feeling when he walked into the store was completely different from the first time he visited, when everything was just beginning. Everyone was working with confidence and joy, no longer with fearful looks or heavy silences whenever the boss walked by. The early results. When John walked into the break room, the first thing he noticed was laughter. Not the forced laughter of people fearing their boss, but genuine, comfortable laughter. In the corner, Tommy, now the assistant manager, was training a new employee on the inventory system. A proud smile appeared on his face as he spoke about the new way of working. What's important is accuracy, not speed. We always encourage people to work carefully to avoid mistakes. No one will yell at you for working slower as long as you're doing it right. John smiled, realizing that Tommy, who had once been threatened and fearful, had now risen to become a true leader. He understood that this change didn't just come from decisions made in the boardroom, but from small daily steps taken by employees when they were given the opportunity and autonomy. Employees driving change. As John walked through the customer area, he saw Laia Torres helping a customer process a return. Laia, despite being 8 months pregnant, radiated confidence and joy in her work. No longer did she worry about being fired for being pregnant or whether she would receive full maternity leave. With the new policies that John had implemented, Laia could now work without worrying about job security or her future. "Good morning, Laia," John said, prompting her to look up and smile. "Good morning, boss," she replied, her smile radiating pride. "Everything's great. I feel much more at ease." John nodded, satisfied. The change wasn't just in the policies, but also in the attitude of the employees. They no longer felt like forgotten workers in an outdated system. Instead, they felt valued and respected, acknowledging achievements and next steps. But what John was most proud of wasn't just the change in the employees, it was the change in himself. He realized that he hadn't just saved a store or a company, he had saved himself. In the past, he had been too focused on numbers and meetings, not realizing what really mattered. Those people behind the company, the ones working tirelessly every day, the ones who had helped make Thompson Enterprises the name it had become. However, his journey didn't end here. With what had been accomplished, John decided to continue expanding this change across the entire system of Thompson Enterprises. He knew that the changes in this store would not fully transform the company unless there was a long-term plan to reinforce and sustain these new values. Taking stronger steps to spread change, John began rolling out an employee council program across all Thompson Enterprises locations. Each store would elect an employee representative, someone who would serve as a direct link between the staff and management. These representatives would participate in meetings, providing feedback and solutions to help the company improve and develop sustainably. Additionally, John decided to implement a new reward system, not just based on business performance, but also on employee satisfaction and engagement. If we want employees to give their best, we have to ensure they feel respected and appreciated, John said to his management team. Ambitious plans ahead. By now, the changes in the store had spread widely, and John realized that he could do even more to transform the entire retail industry. We can be a role model for the entire industry, not just in performance, but in how we treat our employees, John shared with his team. John also began thinking about sharing Thompson Enterprises' model with other companies, creating a certification system for fair labor practices. Stores that could prove they treated their employees fairly and took good care of them would receive special certification from the company. The end and a new beginning. After returning from his business trip, John sat in his office, looking out the window where the sun was shining. He knew that a long road still lay ahead for both him and the company, but now he felt more confident than ever. What he had done had not only changed the lives of the employees, but had also created a new model that could potentially change the entire retail industry. He smiled, then looked back at the long-term plan he had prepared. We're on the right path, John thought, and this journey has just begun. The visit to the branches of Thompson Enterprises continued throughout the following weeks, and John could clearly feel the changes every day. The values he began to establish in the first store had now started to spread throughout the company. Every employee, regardless of their department, felt more confident, treated fairly, and knew they could contribute to the company's growth. The leaders at each branch had been trained to maintain a friendly and creative atmosphere, no longer following rigid rules, but instead focusing on the well-being of their workers. The beginning of a new work culture. John was especially attentive to the positive feedback from new employees who joined the team during this transformation. The feeling that they were working not just to earn a living, but for a common goal, a connected community, had led to a significant increase in their productivity. The training sessions and meetings between employees and management were no longer dry meetings but open and sincere dialogues about issues in the company, from workflow processes to office environment concerns. People were starting to listen to each other, share ideas, and propose solutions, rather than simply following orders. The Labor Fairness Certification Program. With the success Thomson Enterprises had achieved, John began implementing the Labor Fairness Certification Program he had planned. Each Thomson Enterprises location was now evaluated not only by sales and work performance, but also by how they treated their employees, especially vulnerable groups like single mothers, immigrants, or those facing difficult circumstances. This certification not only helped the company stand out in the industry, but also created positive pressure on other companies to improve how they treated their staff. Stores that received certification would proudly display a special emblem, signifying their commitment to fairness and employee rights. This initiative not only attracted customers, but also increased employee loyalty as they knew their company stood by them when necessary. The lesson on the power of recognition and respect. John realized that the true success of the company wasn't measured by the numbers in the financial reports, but by the change in how the company operated. He had helped people like Elena, giving them an opportunity to change their lives, and had created a model where everyone could grow, advance, and live a fulfilling life. Success wasn't just about profit, it was about how the company supported the people who worked for it, exploring the unlimited potential of people. In the weeks that followed, John met with many CEOs from other companies to share Thomson Enterprises' model. What he realized was that it wasn't just retail companies that could apply this approach, it was any industry. The cultural change within a company didn't just benefit employees, it could have a positive impact on the economy as a whole. With each meeting, each story shared, John felt more confident in the path he had chosen. He wasn't just helping one company grow, he was helping to create a more equitable business ecosystem. The new leaders within Thomson Enterprises weren't just managers, but role models for change, inspiring others from within. The next step, John stood at the pinnacle of his career, but he knew the story wasn't over yet. The company had improved, but this change didn't stop here. He dreamed that this model would spread widely, not just nationally, but internationally. The principles of labor fairness and employee care he had built would be the guiding light for other companies to follow. We are creating a world where fairness isn't just an ideal, but a reality, John thought to himself. And that's why he would continue this journey, not just for his company, but for the entire industry and for all the workers in the world. John stood on stage at the international conference, the spotlight highlighting his calm demeanor and confidence. With a microphone in hand, he faced thousands of attendees from all over the world. He looked around, and every face was watching him with anticipation. He knew that this wasn't just another speech. It was an opportunity to share the changes that had not only transformed his company, but also the way big corporations viewed fairness and workers' rights. Looking back at the journey. Over the past 3 years, John had witnessed change, not just within the stores of Thomson Enterprises, but also in himself. From a leader focused on profits and efficiency, he had learned the valuable lesson of listening to and taking care of employees. He had come to understand that creating a fair, respectful, and caring work environment was the foundation for sustainable growth. Expanding beyond national borders. Since the labor fairness model at Thomson Enterprises had been implemented and proven effective, many international companies sought him out to learn and adopt it. The principles John laid out weren't just theoretical, they had been tested in practice. The Labor Fairness Certification Program, which began with changes within his own company, had become a global trend. More than 1,000 businesses from different countries had joined the program, including major corporations like Apple, Google, and Amazon. Sharing the human-centered model. At the conference, John shared the story of Elena, who had become a role model for overcoming adversity. Elena's story, a single mother fighting oppression at work, was now an inspiration to millions of workers around the world. Elena wasn't just a symbol of mental strength, but also the catalyst for a movement where large companies realized they could be profitable without sacrificing workers' dignity. John also emphasized that implementing policies like fair monitoring and anonymous employee surveys had helped his company minimize power abuse and create a work environment where everyone felt respected and valued. Recognition and global momentum. The story of Thomson Enterprises spread, and it was recognized globally. It was no longer just a success story of a large company, but a clear demonstration that a human-centered leadership model where employees come first is an effective business strategy. Industry reports showed that companies adopting these policies not only grew in revenue, but also experienced stronger employee engagement, lower turnover, and increased customer loyalty. At the conference, leaders from other companies also took the stage to share their stories, how they had adopted this model and the success they had achieved. This movement was no longer limited to one industry, but had become a global trend. The journey is not over. As John finished his speech, a wave of applause rose from the audience. He smiled, but deep down, he knew that his journey wasn't over. While Thomson Enterprises had achieved much, he still felt a strong sense of responsibility. There would be challenges ahead, and the company would continue to evolve and grow. John walked away from the conference with a strong belief. True change doesn't come from big decisions, but from small, meaningful actions, from listening, and from sharing with employees every day as they walk into work. He felt proud of what he had accomplished, but he also knew that only when every company in the world adopted these policies, the lives of workers would truly improve, closing one chapter and opening another. When John returned to his office, he didn't rush to open financial reports or next quarter's development plans. Instead, he looked at the family photo on his desk, at the smiling faces of Elena, Tommy, and the other employees whose lives he had helped change. He knew that helping them, changing their lives, was the greatest achievement of a true leader. And then he thought to himself, this journey was never about money. It was about fairness. And I will continue this journey, not just for my company, but for an entire industry, for all the workers in the world. A month after his speech at the international conference, John looked back on all that had been accomplished with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The early days of this revolution seemed challenging and full of obstacles, but now everything was beginning to fall into place. The changes within the company had not only affected the employees, but had also had a profound impact on the entire retail industry. The success of Thomson Enterprises. Thomson Enterprises' success was no longer measured just by revenue, but by the transformation in the way the company was run. A company focused on people, protecting employees' rights, and empowering those behind the business to truly grow. These values were now being widely implemented, and even competitors in the industry couldn't help but recognize the difference Thomson Enterprises was making. Elena's rise to leadership. Looking back, John was most proud of the change in Elena. The woman who had once been a symbol of hard work, endurance, and sacrifice was now a leader. She didn't just embody personal recovery, but also served as a living example of the values John had worked so hard to build in the company. When John looked at Elena, he knew that the changes within the company were truly meaningful, not just for people like her, but for everyone working under the shadow of poor leadership. Elena had successfully stepped into the role of store manager, leading her team with love, empathy, and the ability to face challenges. Her colleagues who had worked with her now had confidence in the future because they knew they could have a stable job with full benefits and a fair environment. She had helped Thomson Enterprises not only retain its employees, but also attract talented ones who were willing to commit fully to the company's mission. A new beginning for the industry. Thomson Enterprises' success had inspired many other companies. John's meetings and workshops with CEOs of rival companies were no longer just about profit margins. Instead, the discussions focused on issues like fair human resource management, employee rights protection, and how each company could create a better work environment for their employees. John felt proud to see other companies begin to adopt the model he had created. Every time a new company joined the Labor Fairness Certification Program, he felt he was one step closer to achieving his long-term goal: to create a retail industry where every worker felt respected, valued, and cared for. The shift in leadership approach. However, the most important change John recognized was in his own approach to leadership. In the past, he had always focused on numbers, profits, market share, and revenue. But now he understood that true success is when employees feel that they are truly important. When they feel respected and have the opportunity to grow, they will give their best, and the result will be sustainable company growth. John knew that leadership wasn't about giving orders from the top. It was about understanding and walking alongside employees, listening to them, and creating an environment where they felt respected and loved their work. In fact, small actions, like treating employees with respect and care, had proven the value of listening and nurturing. The rebirth of Thomson Enterprises. When John sat back in his office, looking at the reports and data, he no longer just saw cold numbers, but a rebirth. The figures now reflected the changes in company culture. Revenue was up, turnover was down, and most importantly, customer satisfaction was at an all-time high. But above all, it was the change in each person working at the company. Looking at the employees in the meeting room, John felt a sense of pride that could not be compared to anything else. They were the ones who had fought through difficulties, endured injustices, and now they weren't just part of the company. They were the ones creating the change. And these were the same people who would continue spreading these values to the next generation of employees. A new spring for the company. In the end, these achievements weren't just a personal victory for John. They were a triumph of human values, fairness, and integrity in leadership. John knew his journey wasn't over. One day, when looking back from a higher place, he would see that he had helped change an entire industry. But for now, he only wanted to look at the people he had helped, the ones who had changed their destinies and careers. With each step, with each change, John continued to learn and grow. And he knew that if he continued to live by these values, Thomson Enterprises would never stop growing. Time passed and John continued to persist with the reforms within the company and beyond. A year after the changes had begun to be implemented, not only Thomson Enterprises but the entire retail industry had begun to change in a powerful way. Every time John looked at the employee rankings, the positive feedback from customers, and the increasingly stronger financial reports, he knew he had not made a mistake in choosing this difficult but correct path. A truly happy work community. Elena, now the store manager, had become an inspiring leader to her colleagues. She led her team, not just with managerial skills, but with compassion, understanding, and the ability to face challenges. Elena's transformation from a simple cleaning staff member into a capable manager was a clear testament to the change, not only in the company culture, but also in the individuals who made up that company. Every day in team meetings, Elena didn't just talk about work. She listened to the stories of her employees. Stories that may have been forgotten before, but now became an important part of the company's shared growth. Employees no longer felt afraid to voice their opinions. They no longer felt like invisible workers in the shadows, but as important parts of the success story that Thomson Enterprises was writing. Strong growth in the industry. With the changes in labor fairness and transparency policies, John had not only created a positive environment for employees at Thomson Enterprises, but had sparked a powerful ripple effect across the retail industry. Other companies started to reconsider their business models. The old leadership models, where employees were just tools to serve profits, were slowly being replaced by leaders who truly cared about people. The labor fairness certification programs John initiated had attracted the attention of many partners and major organizations. Companies that joined the program weren't just meeting a standard, they were genuinely changing the way they viewed and treated their employees. This not only increased employee engagement and productivity, but also created a significant difference in customer loyalty. Challenges still exist, but no retreat. However, despite all the achievements, John knew that the journey was never easy. Facing the deep changes within the organization, John still encountered new challenges. Sometimes he felt weary from the decisions he had to make, especially when faced with opposition from people who were accustomed to the old ways. But John never wavered. He knew that these difficulties were just part of the long-term development process. These challenges wouldn't stop the company's growth. Instead, they would make the company and its leaders stronger and more resilient. True success comes from dedication. John didn't think that true success came when a company reached its highest financial targets. For him, success was when every person in the company, from the lowest employee to the top leaders, felt they were valued, felt they had opportunities to grow, and achieve something good in life. Success is when the company ensures that no one is left behind and everyone has a chance to rise. In this way, John realized that he wasn't just changing a company, he was changing the entire system and culture in the industry. He no longer saw business as a competition over numbers, but as a journey of building sustainable value for the community. Looking toward the future, success is not a destination, but a journey, and for John, this journey had just begun. He knew that these changes had to be maintained and developed further. There was no formula that could help the company achieve long-term success other than continually listening, improving, and taking care of employees. When John stood on the stage, looking at the audience applauding, he realized one important thing. When leadership truly focuses on people, success comes from sustainable values, not short-term profits. And he knew that with this leadership, his company would continue to go far, not just because of smart business strategies, but also because of the profound changes he had brought to the people within the company. True success for John was when every employee felt they had power, opportunity, and fairness. These are the core values of Thomson Enterprises, the values that he and his team would continue to build and develop. A year had passed since John Undercover visited the Thomson Enterprises store. Now the company was no longer just a name in the retail industry, but a symbol of the profound change in how workers were viewed within an organization. Looking back on this journey, John knew that what he had done had not only transformed the company, but had also made significant marks in the careers and lives of every employee. But success wasn't just about revenue figures or customer satisfaction levels. True success came when every worker in the company felt they could trust the organization. They didn't just come to work for a paycheck. They stayed because they saw value and respect placed at the forefront. They felt they were an essential part of the machine, where no one was left behind and every effort was recognized. Implementing comprehensive reforms. With the Labor Fairness Certification Program, John initiated, Thomson Enterprises not only created a better environment for its employees, but also caused a ripple effect throughout the retail industry. Major companies began to learn from and implement similar reforms. The Labor Fairness Certification Programs, random checks to ensure fair treatment of employees, and transparency in employee treatment had become the industry standard. These results didn't come easily. Changing a system that had existed for so long, built on exploitation and manipulation of workers, was not simple. However, John had not only fought for justice, but also for the people who were struggling in manual labor jobs, those who had no voice in the organization. The price of change. However, as John looked at the changes he had made, he also realized that every change had a price. His relationships with board members had become tense. Some executives were dissatisfied with the changes to labor policies. They were concerned about the increasing costs and its effect on short-term profits. But John was unwavering. He knew that true value came from sustainability and protecting the rights of employees. For too long, companies had focused only on profits, forgetting that people were the core of long-term success. The relationship between leadership and employees. The relationship between John and his employees was no longer that of a boss and workers. It was one of teammates. He was no longer standing at the top of the pyramid, giving orders from above, but he had truly become a leader who understood and shared with them. He no longer just looked at the end results, but took time to understand the struggles they faced every day. Every morning, he spent a few minutes talking to the employees, listening to their stories. He understood that leadership wasn't about giving orders or directing from afar. It was about understanding, empathizing, and creating an environment where everyone felt respected and loved their work. Labor Fairness Certification and the future. With the sweeping reforms John had implemented, his company had become a model for the retail industry. Other stores and companies began to adopt similar models, and the Labor Fairness Certification Program had become the new industry standard. Customers no longer just cared about the products, they also cared about how a company treated its employees. To demonstrate all these changes, John held a large seminar at the National Retail Conference at the end of the year. Here, he shared his journey, from discovering the injustices within his company to creating and implementing meaningful changes. He didn't just talk about successes, he also discussed the challenges and obstacles that he and his employees had faced to achieve this goal. When looking back, John knew that his goal wasn't just to improve working conditions for the employees within his company, but to change the entire industry. He had truly done that and would continue to walk down this path because for him, this change was the most important thing. Conclusion: John's story wasn't just about a successful CEO, it was about true leadership. As a leader, John didn't just look at the numbers. He looked at the people and what truly created the value of a company. The changes he made didn't just help his company grow, they helped transform the entire industry, creating a new standard for how employees should be treated and building long-lasting relationships between workers and leaders. That's why John's story will echo for a long time, serving as a lesson in human-centered leadership, transforming outdated systems, and striving for a fairer future. Thank you for following this story with us. If you found this video inspiring or it helped you see life in a new light, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any exciting and meaningful videos in the future. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next videos. Wishing you strength and confidence on your journey.